Disneyland is a park of frontierlands and fairy tales. It took the efforts of many Imagineers to take this farmland and make it to what we know it is today. This is the story of three of those Imagineers. Welcome to Disney Journey. After 100 episodes, you know who I am by now. So let's get started on this episode. When the Imagineers were designing Disneyland for Anaheim, they were building on farmland, vast acres of farmland. And it must have seemed to them that there'd be areas that were never going to be occupied, especially the land in Tomorrowland. After 70 years, we know that's not the case. So we're going to look at the early days of Tomorrowland and the classic attraction, the Viewliner. One of the perks of being an Imagineer was my opportunity to study the old original drawings. In the decades before digital, all drawings were hand-drawn, either on trace or vellum. And after a while studying drawings, even if they were not signed, I could tell the hand behind the art because they just weren't informational. They weren't just tender drawings. They were pieces of beauty, and they should be hang in a museum. The Disney legend John Hench deserves a gallery in this museum all to himself. John was still in the building when I worked there. He had an upstairs office and a conference room in 1401 on Flower Street in Glendale, California. And John was accessible. I could talk to him in his office, in his conference room, or maybe just tag him at the Big D Cafe when I had a problem that I knew he had the answer to. Of the articles and books written about John Hench, this is the very best one. Smartly written, filled with illustration, I'll leave information in the show notes. Walking on in our museum of Disney legends, we come to a new gallery dedicated to Ruth Shellhorn, not a name that a lot of people know about, not as much as they should. Ruth was a landscape architect brought in late into the Disneyland development and building process. Ruth was indispensable. You could not have had a Disneyland, not on the opening date as planned, without her. She was able to do drawings. She was able to meet with Walt, where she could review documents, collect his notes, make alterations to the plans, and communicate them to the project teams. The University of Georgia Press has released a comprehensive book about Ruth, her work at Disney and elsewhere. When Walt Disney said Disneyland will continue to grow, he was stating the obvious. In 1955, Disneyland had a lot of empty land. There was no shortage of ideas, luckily, for what the land could become. And very quickly, there was an obvious candidate for an obvious reason. After Disneyland's first 100 days of operation, the park realized they needed rides. They needed rides desperately, and they needed them quickly. And they had the opportunity. They quickly realized that that piece of vacant land in Tomorrowland was a perfect prime candidate for a new ride. And so they had a peanut butter and chocolate moment. They knew Walt Disney loved trains. He loved train rides. He had them in his home. He had them in this park. And also they knew something else, that kiddie train rides were very popular. And there was an opportunity to draw inspiration from the GM Aero train, which was streamlined and modern, and it looked scientific. And it would fit perfectly, they thought, into their Tomorrowland. And so with that alignment of ideas, work began on the Viewliner. My memories of the Disneyland Viewliner, and I'll note here because they had a Fantasyland and a Tomorrowland station, you could have a Fantasyland or Tomorrowland Viewliner. For me, it's just the Viewliner or Tomorrowland Viewliner. But I'll back up the truck. I was a child when it was running, and I got to ride it several times. I remember being really excited by it. I know looking back in time, it's kind of modest, but it doesn't really matter. If I could, and I have, I've thanked this man, Bob Gurr, for all the work he's done. He was remarkable. He was the jack of all trades when it came to rides. And those rides that are documented in this book, which tell the stories about this modest train that traveled around Tomorrowland. As famous as the Viewliner is even today, decades after being closed, it had a modest beginning and a modest underpinning. Kiddie train rides were very popular in the day, and there are still, even now, a few of them still running. But the thing about the Viewliner is It got a lot of Disney love. They took a very modest idea and they transformed it. They plussed it. They made the cabs and the engine really attractive. It looked fast even when it was in the station. And they did some smart choices by having bridges, causeways over the water body. You could see it from a distance, and it never really competed with anything except for the steam train. And at that point, it was this wonderful combination, clash, if you will, of the old and the modern and the future. The future has to be more than a dream. It has to be built, like the development of this detail, to surround and hide the wheel covers, to elevate the train from being something you see anywhere else to something you could only see in Disneyland, California. Also the interior cab. It had a low ceiling because, again, this was based upon a kiddie train. But it looked more than that. It looked more futuristic. It looked like it was a Viewliner, a train of the future, the fastest train you'd ever see there in Disneyland Park. It had a route, a very unique route, because, as I said earlier, it has two train stations that were located in Fantasyland and Tomorrowland. The pilot behind the steering wheel would take guests all around this route, and it was great, but it was not to last. And the reason it closed is because, as this quote says, there'll always be more people or guests, but there'll never be more land or Disneyland. Early Tomorrowland attractions developed the unfortunate habit of either being transformed or simply removed. By 1967, when New Tomorrowland opened to guests, they could no longer see Flight to the Moon, the original Autopia, the Flight Circle, or the Viewliner, because the land underneath them was just simply too important, too precious, too valuable. And that's always been the story there in Anaheim. It's a Swiss watch, and there isn't that much land left. And so things that go in have to replace something else. They have to take out a warehouse to put in a Galaxy's Edge, for example. In the future, we do not know what will happen in Tomorrowland, except I can predict safely based upon the past that the future will hold change. Change that comes very quick when you're dealing with a land based upon science and technology. Tomorrowlands have always had a difficult time, but when they work well. When there are showcases of technology or having opportunities for people to get up close and personal with rockets and jet planes and rockets and submarines and all the above. Sometimes you're just delivering a vision. You're not delivering the technology. But when it works, as I said, it really works well. The whole idea of getting on a rocket jet or standing behind chain link fence to see the Rocket Man blast off into the skies of Southern California. That was really cool. Good ideas are never lost. They may move to different land, but they endure. If you take a short walk to Mickey's Toontown, you'll find something that you would not expect to find. There among the characters and the architecture, you'll find a retail shop. It's connected to the Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. And it's not something you really think about, and maybe not even something you notice. But if you look up, look at the engineer's sign. As you look closely, there you will see the Viewliner. It seemed for a time that Tomorrowland was always changing. Holiday Hill was, no longer available for hikes. The Viewliner no longer raced the steam train. The steam train, it still does race the monorail. But the rocket jets, the way we know them, are gone. Because the entire facility had to be removed to build the People Mover. Tomorrowland may have started as a gleam in Walt's eye, but to create and deliver it, we have Bob Gurr, John Hench, and Ruth Shellhorn to thank, because without these Imagineers, we wouldn't have Tomorrowland at all. And who knows what the future may hold for this little piece of farmland in Anaheim. Our trip aboard the Viewliner is ended, and that means this journey is over. Hit the bell notification button to find out and learn as soon as the next episode is released. In the meanwhile, thank you to all the subscribers to this channel because your support is so valuable. Send me your comments and also check the show notes below for details about this episode. Until the next time then, it's goodbye for now from Lost Canyon.